I thought this clip is very fascinating because Dr. Frank Turek is talking about whether or not the gospel authors, whether or not they could have wrote the gospels in Greek.
Would you agree the Bible is written by men?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's written by men, yeah.
And this is something that I can struggle with, but I study linguistics, and I do a lot of stuff with languages, and to my knowledge, and I think to a lot of biblical scholars, but I can't name it off the top of the head because it's something I just recently was reading, but ancient, it was like some form of like ancient Greek was the original version of language that the New Testament was written in. Is that what you believe as well?
Jesus probably spoke either Aramaic or Hebrew, and it was written in Koine Greek, yes.
So do you believe, up there it says opponents admitted gospels written by disciples? Are you saying written, like the gospels according to Mark were written by Mark, or are you saying that just disciples is in somebody that follows like the teachings of the Bible or something like that?
Who wrote the gospels is the question? Or
Yeah, just addressing the one point saying the opponents admitted gospels written by disciples. So I was just wanting a clarification.
Okay, yes, well, as far as we know, the writers of the New Testament, there's 8 or 9 writers dependent upon who wrote Hebrews. Most of them bear the name of the person, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, except, the letters of the Apostle Paul, there's about 13 of them. And then there's other letters written by people like Peter, Jude.
So clarification, you believe
James.
Gospels according to Mark was written by Mark?
Yes.
Okay. The same exact disciples like written in the Bible, so Mark in the Bible wrote Gospels according to Mark. Yes?
He wrote the Gospel according to Mark.
Okay.
That's what the earliest evidence shows, yes.
Well,
now, he was probably getting his information mostly from Peter. That's the thought there.
Well, I would say that most of the evidence points to that being completely false because the people at this time and Mark, the position that he was in socioeconomically, had no knowledge of Greek at all.
Oh, no, sure they did.
I disagree. I think most historians would disagree with that, and I think most biblical scholars admit that Mark did not write the Gospels according to Mark. You just attest to it. Most people spoke Aramaic at that time. Most people also did not speak Hebrew, ancient Hebrew that was mostly attested to religious figures. And as fishermen and as these followers of Jesus, they were not in the church. They were not wealthy. They did not have high socioeconomic standing that is associated with knowing either ancient Hebrew or ancient Greek.
Well, what you're doing, though, is you're taking aggregate...
So I'll jump in. I do want to let you hear Frank Turek's response, but Greek was the common language of the Mediterranean area. If you were rich or socioeconomic status was higher, then you would actually speak Latin, not Koine Greek. Koine Greek was the lower level language that it said that even household people and slaves even knew Koine Greek. Not saying that they were all literate, but the fact that they were able to at least speak it. And I think the guy asking the question forgets or doesn't even know that the Septuagint was around 200 years before Jesus. In the letter of Orestes, it says King Ptolemy II wanted the Hebrew Bible to be translated into Greek for his library.
What you can't do is, like suppose you say that the average, just I'm making something up, the average income in Fairfax, Virginia is $100,000 a year per household. And that's the average. You can say, okay, that's the average, but you can't point at one person in here and say, you're making $100,000. You can't take aggregate data and apply it to individuals, just like you can't take the aggregate of the knowledge of the first century and apply it to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, because you don't know if they were a special case.
Yeah, but that's exactly my point, is that we don't know specifically. And so when you don't know specifics, you go by aggregate data because that's what the closest average person is.
But if you have testimony from reliable people that says they did write it, just like if I had testimony from reliable people that said that man did make $100,000, then I would say or 200 or whatever it was, then I would go with that rather than trying to apply the aggregate data to the individual. Church fathers widely attested the gospel writers to the names that we have now, and there is no other data from that time period which suggests any other author. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What would the writers of the New Testament, what motivation would these people have to invent all this?
I don't claim to know any motivation.
We know documents and sources were written very early. I didn't have time to go through it here. Yeah. Even Bart Ehrman, the great skeptic from UNC Chapel Hill, admits Paul writes 1 Corinthians in 55 AD. And an ancient creed that talks about Jesus dying and rising from the dead and everybody that he appeared to comes all the way from the 30s AD. So the real question is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Not who wrote the Gospel of Mark, or whether Mark told everything exactly the way it should have been told. The question is, did Jesus rise from the dead? And that's really the issue.
But if you want to know more about how we know Mark wrote Mark and Luke wrote Luke, there's another video that I'm going to put. Frank Turek actually talks about this more in depth in a shorter video, but I'll be making that video and you can check it out, and I'll put the link in the description below. Till next time, peace.